we want to get into a discussion with our friend Jay Glazer right now. He is a National Football League insider for Fox Sports' NFL pregame studio show. He's also the founder of Merging Vets and Players, a nonprofit organization that connects combat vets and former professional athletes. Jay, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
First, I mean, I'm fascinated by, and obviously it just sounds like such an important mission, this founding that you've done of Merging Vets and Players. Found the Merging Vets and Players, this organization. What are you doing? I mean, how does this work, and how can people get involved?
Well, it's MVP for short, and I'm basically taking former combat vets who are in transition, which transition sucks for anybody who, for a lot of us who are pro athletes or veterans. So we're taking former combat vets and we're merging them together with former pro athletes. Started with just NFL and fighters because those are my two worlds, but now it's branched out to everything. And look, it's basically it's a community. It's a mental health thing, and I'm trying to show both sides. Like, you playing in the NFL, man, when the uniform comes off, your greatness doesn't suddenly just leave you, right? It's what's behind your ribcage that got you to beat out millions and millions to get to that level. If you're an Olympian or a fighter or a baseball player, whatever it is. But the same thing with our combat vets. They go overseas and they do such great things. They have grace under fire and courage under pressure, and they save a lot of people. And they make us feel safe over here without really even knowing us. Then they come back home over here and it's like, oh, I'm different. And I'm trying to shift that narrative of like, no, you're different. Like, different is good. Different leads to success. But who reminds them of that? So if you put them in a group and you can remind each other of what your greatness is, that's like, our results have been magical. We train together for about a half hour just to give you that burn again and be beholden to your brother or your sister on your right or left. But after that, we sit around in mats and, man, we just talk. And we talk so real. We put every elephant in the room there, and the vulnerability part of it is what makes us so strong.
Jay, appreciate you coming on. You've got a new book, Unbreakable, How I Turned My Depression and Anxiety into Motivation. You can too. Jay, I'm just fascinated by, and I know you have had tremendous experience, how much soldiers love football and love football players. And I know as part of the Fox pregame show, you guys have gone all over the world to meet different soldiers who are serving overseas. What has your experience been like in terms of being able to interact with those guys? And why do you think so many people serving overseas connect so substantially with football players in general?
Well, when we have our meetings, it is pretty cool, man. Like, I've got to go around the world with Fox this is my 19th year at Fox, and every year they have sent me or our whole crew to a military installation on Veterans Day, on Thanksgiving. It's been just incredible. And then me being involved with mixed martial arts, I've gotten to train troops throughout the world also. And we have our MVP sessions. It's pretty cool. Our vets will tell our athletes, because our athletes a lot of times go, well, I don't belong in this group. We're like, no, yes, you do. And the vets will say, hey, you guys gave us a break from war. When we're out there, in battle, a lot of them are thinking, man, I just got to get back and I got to watch this game or I got to watch this fight. It's pretty cool. And recently in a meeting, one of our vets said, hey, you guys helped save us in war. It's now our turn to save you guys, because we know you guys are struggling when the uniform comes off. It's pretty cool, the commonality. Look, I know it's not the same job. I get it. But the struggle, when you lose your uniform, man, that sucks. It's hard, right? And a lot of us, like for me, I wrote this book, Unbreakable, because of my mental health issues, because I have, depression, anxiety, like clinical, from my earliest childhood memory. I don't know what it's like to not wake up in the gray. And the things that help me out, and I put this in the book, are having a team. When I don't have a team, usually like my fight team, man, the roommates in my head, they do not talk nicely to each other on a daily basis. And the venom, it kind of spews. And like, look, I know my life is great on the outside. I get it. My life, I got fame and fortune, no doubt. But between my ears sucks. And when I have a team, it sucks a little bit less. When I could be of service to people, which is also, why I wrote this book, I kind of get the gray to fade a little and see some streaks of blue.
Jay, over 20 service members, veterans, kill themselves every single day.
That number is not okay, man. 22 a day.
Man, and
That's
we've
not
got a
day.
huge number of veterans that we are excited and respect to the utmost degree who listen to us every day. And they know, they see it when they come back from overseas, the difficulty of integrating back into civilian life, the challenges that brings. What would you tell those people out there, many of whom are listening to us right now, that might be struggling as they come to grips with their service terms ending, or maybe just their overseas tenure being back civilian side? What have you seen, and what would you like for those people to know from your perspective?
Well, here's, I think, a huge problem is our vets come home and they're told not to talk about it, right? They're really ingrained not to have individuality. It's not about you. It's about the team. Well, when the rest of America is lying on their resumes to pump it up, our veterans kind of downplay what they've done. And it's really hard for them to transition back when you do that. So I'm trying to give these guys and gals their individuality. Let them know it's okay to boast and brag about what you've done. Because what you've done, listen, the stuff I've done, those are my stories, but really pales in comparison to what they've done over there. They've saved lives. I've always said, it's unbelievable. They don't know me. They don't know my kid. They don't know my family. Yet they leave their own families to go fight for our freedom. It is so incredibly selfless. And, I saw too many of them struggling when I looked up to them so much. So I know I can coach. I can coach people to do crazy things in a cage. And I have this MMA program I use for pro athletes. And me and Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell trained 1,200 of these guys. I know I could train people between their ears and behind their ribcage, and I wanted to use, that ability to coach or train to help them, to put it to use to our vets because they deserve it. And that's who should be running a lot of businesses in our country. And we have a lot of them who are, I think, 6 or 7 of our employees in MVP. I think they were homeless when I first met them, and we helped, build them up, give them a team, give them a community, and all of a sudden their greatness came out. And they are running our chapters. They're just amazing. We just got to, show them it's okay to talk about what you've done. Definitely stay connected to your team. And, I want them to be proud. I got this one dude, very first guy I ever had, Elliot Ruiz. He came in one day, and Elliot, man, he was the first guy that came in. Couldn't look me in the eye, and I'm like, what's going on with you? Why do you always come in like this? To our gym, and he said, well, man, I've had 17 surgeries. My wife has to get me out of bed. And, I said, how? He said, well, we rescued 7 American POWs. And, man, the truck came, tried to get back. I shot the truck up, flipped over, hit razor wire, took me for a ride. But, man, now I'm, left with all these injuries. I said, well, hold on, back up. Did you just say you saved 7 American POWs? He goes, yeah, but don't yeah, but me. Did you just say you saved 7 American POWs? He said, yeah. I said, okay. From now on, I want you walking around the streets here and looking at everybody saying, I ain't like the rest of you guys. I'm different. And he said, am I just supposed to change the way I view myself? Just like that? And I said, yep, just like that. Tomorrow, start it. And a lot of these vets, when I say it, kind of get angry about it until they realize, yeah, I am different. It is okay. And Elliot changed the way he viewed himself that day. And, man, the kind of a whole movement was born. It's been beautiful. And that's what I want them to understand. There is so much to be proud of and different, and stay connected with your teammates.
We're speaking to Jay Glazer of Fox NFL Sunday. He's also the author of Unbreakable, How I Turned My Depression and Anxiety into Motivation, and you can too. Jay, on the sports side, I know we got the Super Bowl coming up, and Clay might talk to you about that in a second, but obviously the Winter Olympics underway. It has been something of a learning curve for me to see that there's even more, it seems, political bias and conformity within the sports media than in the political media, and obviously all leaning very left. Do you think that there will be a moment at which they will start to realize that speaking out against China in the sports media has to happen, or else there's no moral authority to speak out against whatever issue gets their attention here stateside?
I'll be honest with you. I'm the last dude who talks politics. I know you guys love to. I hate talking politics, and I also haven't really paid attention to the Olympics. So, I like talking about stuff that I'm somewhat of an expert in, and I am so not when it comes to this. I know that my 2.3 GPA doesn't have me smart enough to talk about this stuff. That's for you guys.
What happens?
No, okay then.
Jay, what happens in the Super Bowl? A lot of people, 100 million people, are going to be watching on Sunday. Yep. It's in L.A. I'm on the Fox lot right now for the week. Mm-hmm. Rams, Bengals. If people out there have to pick a side, if they have to make some bets for, part of their Super Bowl parties, what do you expect to see? Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, Zach Taylor, or Sean McVay? Who's holding up the trophy at the end of the day?
Look, if you look at the teams, the Rams are the more well-rounded team. And I think the Rams learned something about themselves last week. Sean McVay is a bully, and they really needed to take on his personality, and they finally did last week. Right? We have all these great players, and, it's still a fight. Football is a fight. And, I think last week's version of the Rams, that's probably the more talented team. But, man, Joe Burrow is a culture changer. A complete culture change. And we've already seen them be completely out of it and him bring everybody all the way back. So I got to be honest with you, I keep flip-flopping back and forth. If you ask me now, I'm probably looking at Rams. If you ask me like in 25 minutes from now, I may get a call and talk to somebody else in the Bengals who kind of convince me the other way, and I'll go back to the Rams. It's just there's such you just can never count the Bengals out. They just keep clawing back because of that guy.
Jay, we appreciate it. We encourage everybody to go check out your book. We also really appreciate all the work that you're doing with the veterans and everybody else out there. Look forward to seeing you again sometime soon, my man.
If I can, real quick, again, this book is, I got clinical depression and anxiety, but this is for everybody who's living in the gray. Like we all just went through a pandemic. It's a hard world to live in, especially with social media these days. So whether it's you or you have somebody you can connect with, you'll laugh your butt off in the pages. I made it where it's funny so I can kind of tackle the hard stuff. But, man, I'm doing this, too, to I need a bigger team for my own mental health, so I'm hoping to get a whole bunch of teammates with this.
No doubt, Jay, we appreciate it. We know there's tons of people out there who listen to us who are veterans, who are coming back from tours, and I think you can get a big help by checking out what Jay is doing. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Virginia mom, Merianne Jensen, she's with us on the line, but before we let you hear from her, the update here, I want to recall that she went viral last week for speaking out at a school board meeting. Here is that audio.
On November 15th of last year, I had the privilege of speaking with Dr. McDade for 10 minutes following the CRT town hall meeting. During that discussion, which was friendly and cordial, I asked what she, as superintendent, could do to get the kids out of masks. Dr. McDade told me that she would if she could, but that her hands were tied by then Governor Northam's executive order mandating face coverings. And if it weren't for that, things would be different. Well, tonight, things are different. And I'd like to ask you, Dr. McDade, tonight, what has changed? And what do you plan on doing now that your hands are untied? I'm asking all of you to step up the way other leaders who have and are ending COVID restrictions by the day. When will you? What will it take? You are on the losing side of history, and it's time to make that right before these children now.
Thank you. That was Virginia mom Merianne Jensen, who is with us now. Merianne, thanks for calling to the Clay and Buck Show.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it.
What's it like to go viral when you're standing up for your kids and the kids all across the country that are being forced to mask up for no apparent good reason? How's it been going?
It's been surreal. It's been surreal. The video was put up on YouTube for my family on the east or the west coast to see how I did. I woke up the next morning and it had gone viral, and I was shocked. It was it's just been a surreal week. It's been overwhelming, and it's been amazing, actually.
And what are some of the reactions you've gotten from folks? I mean, who's reaching out to you? And I just want to know, I would assume a lot of parents are probably saying to you, thanks for doing it. Thanks for speaking the truth.
Oh, I've had hundreds of people from all over the country reaching out to me. I've had grandpas that have said, thank you for fighting for my grandchildren. I've had mothers. I've had fathers. At the board meeting that night, I had little kids coming up to me, hugging me, telling me, thank you for fighting for them. And so that's what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for the kids, but I'm doing it for all the other parents who may not have a voice or who have jobs and they're not able to speak out. That's what I'm here for, and I will continue to do it.
Merianne, this is Clay. I appreciate you coming on with us here. I saw your speech. I spoke at my school back in August for my kids as well. I want to start with this. How many kids do you have in school, and where are they going to school, and what has been the reaction since that school board meeting?
I have 4 children. I have a 12-year-old son. I have twins who are 10, a boy and a girl, and I have a 7-year-old little girl. And I'm not really comfortable saying what schools they go to, but they are in Prince William County.
Okay, so in Prince William County, and I loved the way you laid it out talking about that situation. You guys have ended up as the epicenter now in many ways in Northern Virginia as the battleground over school masking. What is the latest in terms of what's going on in that county in Virginia, and what do you anticipate in the wake of that school board meeting and your speech that went viral and we played on this show and obviously has been shared so many different places all over?
That's a great question. I wish I knew it was going to happen. I wish Superintendent McDade would call me and say, hey, you know what, thanks for your speech. We're going to end mask mandates. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. Our 7 counties went into a lawsuit. It just went through the Arlington Circuit Court, and it's going to go now to the Supreme Court, unfortunately, or the Virginia Supreme Court. Unfortunately, there was a conflict of interest in that Arlington court. The judge had a spouse who is a teacher in that county, so that's a big mess. As far as what's going to happen, I really don't know. With all of these states taking down mask mandates, the writing is on the wall. They've got to wake up and see that they are losing. They are losing big time, and it needs to end.
We're speaking to Virginia mom Merianne Jensen, for anyone joining us, who last week went viral for her speech at her school board in Virginia, where she said enough with this mask madness. And specifically, Merianne, I wanted to have you address, that there was a member of the school chancellor or superintendent or some school official who had said months previously, were it not for the governor's order, when the governor was Democrat Northam, we would totally take the masks off your kids' faces. And now it's Governor Youngkin, and they're still not taking the masks off the faces. Do they have any explanation for you? Did you get, either before or after your speech, any explanation from that official about why he or she essentially lied?
No, I haven't heard anything. It was our superintendent. We were at a critical race theory town hall meeting on November 15th. I remember what she was wearing. I remember where we were standing in the hallway. I grabbed her aside and said, hey, what can you do to get these kids out of masks? And she looked at me and she said, I know it's been so hard. I would love to see things back to normal. But unfortunately, my hands are tied and I'm waiting for guidance from Richmond. So I came home and I told my children, and we said, just wait, guys, just wait, just a few more months. We've got Governor Youngkin coming in, just wait. And so I was lied to, and I do not like to be lied to. And that's been the hardest thing, is for my children to be so excited to be able to get out of masks. And then, oh, sorry, guys, our superintendent who lied to me is now saying we can't do that. That's been the hardest thing, is just seeing how my children have been affected by this.
We're talking to Merianne Jensen. Okay, you reached out to me yesterday, and this got me super fired up. So your 3-minute discussion, your speech, your argument against kids having to wear masks, and as you said, you're a mother of 4 kids in Northern Virginia, that went up on YouTube. And then YouTube said it violated their community standards, and they pulled that down. Now, just for people out there who are listening, you spoke at a public forum, a school board event. It is the very essence of a community-based event to allow people to share their opinion about their kids. Again, just to reiterate, you've got 4 kids in these schools. What did YouTube say to you? Is it still pulled down? And what sort of recourse, if any, do you have to enable that 3-minute discussion to be able to be shared again? Because so many parents out there are like you. They're like me. They want to be able to share the data because it is, I think, child abuse to continue to put kids in masks when there's no scientific evidence to support it.
Yeah, I was ticked yesterday when I went to click on my video to show somebody and it said you are violating community standards. I was really angry. I felt like they were trying to shut down my voice. And I guess YouTube thinks that moms can't speak up. They were trying to keep me in my place. They wanted to get me back in the kitchen. And like I've said before, not this mom and not all the other moms who are sick of school boards playing playing political games with our children. So I tweeted it, and I got a lot of comments. I've got over 100,000 impressions just on that one tweet. And I believe it's back up because of some pressure from high-profile individuals, and I feel like they're losing, and they know that they're losing. So all these states are reversing their mask mandates, and we're at the top of the wave, and it's cresting. And I think YouTube knows this. They're afraid of us.
That's so well said, and I wanted to follow up. I'm glad that YouTube has adjusted their response there, and I don't think it's any doubt that you reaching out and helping to draw attention to it. When you saw New Jersey, Delaware, and Connecticut, those are 3 blue states with 3 Democratic governors, effectively acknowledge that your argument was right. What was your reaction to seeing what happened yesterday as the tide against masking seems now to have spread not only from parents in red or purple states, but now directly into blue states?
Yeah, it's surprising, but it's not. I wish I could say I was the voice. I wish I could say I was the catalyst that started this. But I think parents it's resonating to parents that the facts and the data. And so they can't hide from these. These blue states cannot hide from the fact that 331 children have died of COVID-related incidences. We can't hide behind this anymore. Children are not lining up on the streets or in the schools dying. And that may sound callous, but they're just not. And so these blue states should have lifted their mask mandates a long time ago when the data has come out.
Merianne Jensen. Merianne Jensen, thank you so much. Fired Up Virginia Mom. We hope you'll come back and tell us how this goes, because until this fight is over, it's not over.
It's not over. We got to keep fighting. We've got to put the pressure on these school boards. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Merianne. Great work. We appreciate you being with us. Winter Olympics underway in China right now, and you might have even seen what I guess is the artificial snow ski slope next to the nuclear cooling towers and what looks like a dystopian hellscape of some part of Beijing. I've been to Beijing. Let me tell you, that place is huge. It is a giant city. It goes on forever. Let's talk a bit more about China, though, with Erich Schwartzel right now. He's the author of Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. Erich, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
First, let's just start with the basic thesis you have of your book here. I mean, Clay and I have talked before about how they'll actually edit out Taiwan patches from Maverick's leather jacket in the Top Gun remake, that Hollywood bends the knee to China, or elites bend the knee to China. What do you see going on here?
Yeah, I think it's a story that's several years in the making. Hollywood movies have been flowing into the Chinese market since the mid-'90s. But it's only been the past decade and a half or so that the Chinese box office has grown exponentially. The Chinese box office, a lot of people don't realize this, is now the biggest in the world. And the U.S. market was flatlining before COVID, and then COVID took a big punch to it. And so the studios, because they want to stay in business, need to get those movies into Chinese theaters. And that means passing approval from Chinese censors. So that explains why, as you said, the patches on Tom Cruise's jacket in a Top Gun reboot can't show Taiwan or Japan, because those are countries that are, in poor favor with China. So the Hollywood movies have to make sure they follow those rules in order to be screened in that country and have access to its box office.
Erich, I read a fantastic excerpt of your book in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend edition. And Buck and I had actually talked about this recently. So Red Dawn, 1980s movie, a lot of people remember that movie, Patrick Swayze, Charlie Sheen, the idea that Russians are suddenly going to land, these kids from Colorado fight back against them. They decided to do a remake, and according to that that excerpt, there were Tom Cruise, everybody sitting around, and they say, okay, it's China that's definitely going to attack. They filmed the whole movie and then suddenly realize, wait a moment, if China is the villain here, MGM, which is distributing and making this movie, is in real trouble. And so they spent, I believe you said, $1 million to turn it into North Korea that was actually attacking the United States instead of China. That's a wild story for our audience out there. Explain that, and you say it was an interesting pivot point in the history of United States and China film, because since that point, basically there have been no bad guys from China because Hollywood is terrified to offend the Chinese.
That's absolutely right. It was the last movie put into production by a major Hollywood studio that had cast China as the villain. But as you said, it didn't even get released with China as the villain, because after MGM had finished filming the movie, Chinese state media outlets made it clear that they were not going to be happy if it came out, and they could punish the company elsewhere. So one of the dynamics we've seen emerge is that Chinese authorities will punish studios however they can. So it's not enough to make a movie that's critical of China and then just not plan to release it in China. Even if you release it just in the U.S., China has shown that it will punish you elsewhere, whether it's blocking consumer products or toys that you make from getting into the country, or forbidding you from building a theme park like Disney and Universal have in the country. There are larger corporate interests threatened by these movies that anger China. And Red Dawn, like Top Gun, is such a deeply ironic example, because as you mentioned, the original, which is considered a classic by so many people, I think of my generation and yours, that is such an emblem of the raw era of American movie making. Almost every movie, it seemed, had a Soviet bad guy, because we were in the middle of a Cold War with the USSR. And today, whenever those movies are remade, China is the obvious choice. I mean, if you're thinking of a country that could plausibly invade the U.S. and that has tensions with the U.S., China makes a lot more sense than North Korea. It's just that economically, it's a non-starter.
Speaking to Erich Schwartzel, author of Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. Erich, how do you think we should best handle this? I mean, would it be, you mentioned the way that, there were all these movies. I mean, God, I remember watching Rocky IV, and I don't know if I've ever been so fired up as when he's squaring off against Ivan Drago and, the whole Ivan Drago, whatever. And there was a very clear messaging there about life behind the Iron Curtain and fighting the Soviet evil empire. Would you like to see China be a country that at least the Chinese Communist Party is treated in a somewhat similar way? I mean, how do we go about this? How do we win the cultural battle? We already know the places where they have a tremendous amount of influence and are dictating our cultural products in many contexts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because what you just described, I think everyone can relate to, right? Like leaving a movie theater and just feeling amped up for whatever you just saw. And I think that's a real power. And I think Hollywood sometimes is rightfully cautious about that power when it comes to, demonizing certain countries or trafficking in certain kinds of stereotypes or stereotypical portrayals. But it feels to me like over the past couple of years, Hollywood has really, for the first time in its history, been at odds with its own government. I mean, if you look at Hollywood history from World War II through the Cold War era, Hollywood has, if not done America's bidding, been seen as something of an adjunct of the American government, and really the most effective tool we have for soft power and hearts and minds around the world. And I think what we're seeing now is there's a bit of a divergence of opinion, where you have politicians, and I would say politicians on both sides of the aisle, as well as consumers, losing patience to not just Hollywood, but also corporate America's acquiescence to China. And I think that's the balancing act that a lot of these studios are going to have to strike, is how do we maintain access to that market, which is very important for our bottom line, but not find ourselves on the wrong side of criticism here at home.
Erich, one of the things that's fascinating, you kind of hinted at this, is even as the Hollywood industry and the movies in general have tried to bend a knee and avoid offending China, they've been allowing fewer and fewer American movies into their country. That's happening with the Marvel movies. I'll use as an example the recent Space Jam remake. I really believe that one reason LeBron James has been so easygoing on China and not ever spoken out and said anything is because he wanted his movie to play in China. Is China actually embarrassing Hollywood even more by not only making decisions about what is and is not allowed to be said about them, but also now not even allowing many of these movies to have access to their massive movie-going market?
For the past 6 to 8 months, I'd say that has become the case. I mean, it really feels like China has ghosted Hollywood, and it is not allowing movies in that traditionally would have made hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. And it's not just the Space Jam reboot you mentioned. I mean, movies as big as Spider-Man and Shang-Chi and Black Widow are not being accepted into Chinese theaters, and it's leaving a big fat zero on the balance sheet of the studios that were expecting.
What do you? Sorry to cut you off.
I
I think that's fascinating. What do you attribute that to? Because the Space Jams and the Marvels are not political in nature in many ways, and you would think a movie like Shang-Chi, which has an Asian star, right, in many ways, would be the essence of why Hollywood potentially is even considering making that movie, because of the why is China suddenly exerting that power even in movies like that don't really have a political bent necessarily, superhero style movies?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, these are not movies about the Dalai Lama. These are not movies about Taiwan. These are movies that were supposed to be global products. Listen, there are a lot of theories. There's no one answer. I mean, one tricky thing about working with China is that you never really get a memo saying we're not accepting your movie and here's why. So you really have to kind of read the tea leaves and see what the signals are. And it seems like a couple things have happened. One is that China's own film industry has grown more and more sophisticated in recent years, and Chinese audiences have understandably grown to prefer Chinese entertainment to American entertainment. I always say, would we expect Americans to go see a Chinese version of Davy Crockett? I mean, it makes sense that as the Chinese movies have gotten better, that people there would gravitate toward those. But the other thing that's happened is as Xi Jinping has consolidated power, there's just been more of a turn inward. And I think there's just been an overall greater skepticism about Western and outside influence. And this has ebbed and flowed throughout Hollywood's relationship with China. Every time, like when Disney was building a massive theme park in Shanghai, there were pockets of the Chinese government who said, do we really want Chinese children, becoming affectionate for Western characters or Disney characters? This happens over time, but we've never seen anything this severe. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of uncertainty here in Hollywood because, when you're greenlighting a movie for $250 or $300 million, you all but need China to turn a profit. That's how expensive these movies are. And if it's that much of an uncertainty, I don't really know what the studio chiefs can do.
Erich Schwartzel, author of Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. Erich, thanks for being with us.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
We're going to go right now to Adam Soos on the ground with Rebel News in Canada. He is at one of the trucker protests. Things are getting hot over there. What's going on, Adam? Tell us what's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely a troubling situation that is arising here. For those unfamiliar, truckers and farmers and their supporters have been down in Coutts, Alberta, which is right across from Sweetgrass, Montana. It's one of the larger sort of border crossings for industrial and commercial purposes. So there's been intermittent closures by those farmers and truckers where they have blocked off the roads in protest to vaccine mandates here in Canada. And now the RCMP, about 15 minutes away from that, have erected their own blockade, so they're only letting select people through. So there's about 20 vehicles, and the RCMP being our federal police, effectively. So they've effectively set up another blockade. Last night they set up a third sort of checkpoint. So there's basically two federal police checkpoints on the way down to this trucker blockade. But at the middle checkpoint, there's been something of an encampment set up, a large sort of gathering, all off the highway, but parked in the ditch. There's fires and food, and they've been standing sort of in solidarity with the truckers. There was hopes that we would have an announcement today that the vaccine mandates would be dropped and then these truckers would be able to mosey on. But unfortunately, we are now getting word that that is not the story at all. And in fact, there is a possibility that there may even be action against these guys. Now, this is all sort of tentative at this point, but what's extremely concerning is mainstream media, who has not been present for any of the people peacefully protesting, not present for any of the people standing around, have arrived here as well down at Coutts at the border, and they're setting up their tripods and getting ready to film, which usually suggests to us that some sort of action, they've been tipped off by authorities that they plan to take action. At 5 p.m. today, there will be an announcement from the Premier, the leader of this province, discussing some lessening of restrictions, but it seems probable, if not possible, that they are going to be taking action at some point here. There's been no lack of police activity.
When you say action, you mean police raids to arrest everybody? I mean, what does action mean?
Yeah, that's effectively what's suggested. And I mean, that's the fear. This isn't for certain. The last thing we heard was that there was an injunction and a move for immediate action. Since that time, we've seen a number of sort of unmarked vehicles rolling through and heading in that direction. But I guess at one point, this was before I've arrived down here, about a week ago, there was an attempt at a raid, and they kind of backed off. But that was the last time mainstream media showed up and set up their cameras. So we have two people right down at the Coutts border. I am with the convoy, or rather the blockade setup protest here. But so likely the action would be down at the Coutts border, not here, but there will certainly be a reaction here if that is what happens. These people are in it for the long haul. They aren't going anywhere, and they aren't going to, from what they've told me, I'm not obviously endorsing this, I'm just relaying what they've told me, they aren't going to leave that blockade willingly. If it comes to arrest or whatever, they said they're not leaving. They aren't going to cave based on the threat of arrest. So things escalating rapidly here, and so I thought I'd, if possible, just get in with you guys a bit early, because at any moment I might have to run off if some action goes off here.
First of all, thank you for making time for us and sharing on-the-ground reporting. You have seen the calumnies, the insults that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, has thrown at these Canadian truckers, all of basically every insult you could imagine. You're around them. What are these guys and girls like who are a part of this Canadian trucker protest?
You know, they are the most incredible people. They are so kind. They're from all backgrounds. Some of them are truckers. Some of them are farmers. Some of them are just families coming out because they're standing for freedoms and they want a future for their children. The rhetoric and the flat-out lies out there about this having anything to do with white supremacy or racism are categorically false. It is fake news in the extreme, and it has been propagated, unfortunately, by our state-funded media and by our Prime Minister himself. Frankly, it's a disgrace. The people here, it's incredible to hear them say that they're finally, again, proud to be Canadian, proud to be Albertan, because they're taking a stand. They're not taking it laying down. We've seen people of every background, every nationality. There's someone up here, actually, who had no intention of coming, but they're from Mexico. They're a trucker, and the rules changed on them, so they couldn't get back down, and they were stuck here not through any intent to protest, but just through the arbitrary laws that seem to be implemented by the government.
We are talking with Adam Soos, who is up in Canada among some of the truckers to make sure that what is going on there is well covered. And Adam, I appreciate you making the time for us. I know it's a bit of a tempestuous time right now, as you just laid out for us at the border region there with the truckers. And this is maybe a piece of education that I would imagine many of our listeners also share with me in terms of being a bit ignorant about the way that Canada and the provinces interact with Justin Trudeau's power. You mentioned that there might be something coming where you were regarding what the mandates were. I know that the truckers have had an impact in some provinces in getting some of these rules changed. Can you give our audience a quick understanding of how province and federal authority applies in China and what these Canadian truckers with their protest have accomplished so far?
Yeah, so effectively what we have is there's a federal branch of government, which we have our federal elections, then we have provincial governments as well, and they have very much different mandates. There's some overlap with funding and things like that, but generally sort of healthcare matters, as we have public healthcare, and health authorities are largely provincially managed, with some federal mandates sort of dictating and providing some overarching structure. So with regards to COVID-19 management, the federal government will provide some direction, and obviously under Justin Trudeau, that direction has been everyone needs to get vaccinated over and over and over, no matter what. Provinces have had different approaches, but sadly, even our more staunchly conservative provinces, Saskatchewan, Alberta, they have largely caved and given in to these types of programs, including vaccine mandates. So right now, unless you have a test for 72 hours. You can't go into a movie theater unless you're vaccinated. You can't go to a restaurant, any of these types of things. So extremely exclusive. So province to province, that can vary. Largely, our premier would be someone who's largely considered as butting heads with Justin Trudeau. But on COVID-19, he seemingly caved on all fronts. Saskatchewan, the adjoining province right next to us, this morning they announced that they would be dropping restrictions, but they haven't exactly laid out the timeline to the best of my understanding, but they've at least made that acknowledgement. Today at 5 p.m. there is set to be an announcement that our restrictions will come to. Very much, I suspect they're going to say that they do intend to drop it, and they won't lay out a very strict timeline. It'll likely be based on some sort of healthcare metrics, like a reduction of people in hospitals relating to COVID-19. But these truckers here want more than that. And I mean, these politicians can profess that these truckers protesting do not have an impact. But the fact is, since the original trucker convoy rolled out to Ottawa, and since these boys have been down at the border blocking things up and taking a stand, the conversation around dropping restrictions has plummeted. Unfortunately, it's very political. These people don't want to be seen as dropping restrictions. Our very progressive, very liberal society is quick to attack them and call them all sorts of bad names, as we mentioned earlier. So I think that they're playing that balancing act. But ultimately, they've been trampling on our freedoms for about 2 years, and it's about time for it to come to an end.
We're speaking to Adam Soos of Rebel News up in Canada, and right now he's at one of these trucker convoy protests. Adam, obviously Justin Trudeau despises this whole thing, and he doesn't want to cave, but it is looking like the Canadian government here, especially given what's happening in downtown Ottawa, is coming under increasing pressure. What would total victory look like here? Would it be a speech from Trudeau? Would it be just state after state in Canada dropping their mandates of their own volition at this point? You know, what would be the truckers are all just celebrating getting what they want?
Yeah. So the truckers effectively want the mandates to be dropped, no forced vaccination effectively, and people can argue over whether it's forced vaccination. I mean, if you take away someone's livelihood, take away all their access to society, on and on, I mean, that's effectively forcing it. You're not pinning them down and jabbing them, but you're taking away their entire livelihood. They want all those mandates dropped across Canada, not just here in Alberta. They want it across Canada. And furthermore, they want insistences and safeguards in place to ensure that this can't happen again. Now, that may not be a unilateral focus and emphasis based on all truckers, but the majority of the truckers I've spoken with down here, that is what they're asking for, permanent removal of vaccine mandates in Canada.
How did this all start? Because we're down in the States, and we've heard from a lot of truckers who many of them are listening in the United States, and they certainly have a great deal of affinity for their fellow truckers north of the border. How did this start? How organic was it? And how long has it been building to the point where we've reached what feels like a crucible moment in this protest?
Yeah, so it's been a few weeks. I mean, and we are talking about fundamentally this movement has been going on for 2 years. Protests started. I've been covering them every week for 2 years. Sometimes we're talking about hundreds of people coming out. Sometimes we're talking about tens of thousands in every city, every major city in Canada. So this has been building for 2 years. While most media outlets have failed, the doctors failed to take a stand, the pundits failed to take a stand. It took the blue-collar, hardworking grassroots truckers to really capture the imagination and the hearts of the nation. So there have been convoys in the past, but they didn't take off. This is a culminative moment in the history of Canada, I think, where other parts of the world were starting to change things. The things that freedom fighters have said all along, you're seeing even people like Fauci and doctors in the UK, and the world was starting to shift, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was utterly unwilling to shift or compromise from what is unscientific rhetoric. What he is espousing is unscientific rhetoric. And so these truckers, I think they happened to come in at the perfect movement, and they said, you know what, we're rolling across Canada and we're standing together. Enough is enough. And I think that captured just the imagination of a nation that we indeed can be free. And I think it's so incredible that it was working class truckers who brought everybody together at this crucial moment.
Adam Soos of Rebel News up in Canada on the scene with the truckers. Adam, we're hoping this comes to the positive resolution that everyone across the country here in the States is hoping for, listening to you right now. And we'll continue to talk to you about it. Thanks for your work on the ground.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Heather McDonald is with us now. She's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor at City Journal, and the author of the excellent book, I've got a copy of it at home, The War on Cops, her latest piece in City Journal, The Guardians in Retreat. Heather, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Buck and Clay. It's an honor.
The Guardians in Retreat. Tell us about this. What's going on?
Oh, it's another example of white culling that is happening across our major institutions. The Art Institute of Chicago, which is one of the great museums in the world, decided to terminate its docent program, not because the docents were doing a poor job or they weren't communicating effectively with students, but because they were overwhelmingly white. And that, in today's world, in institution after institution, is a sin that you simply cannot overcome. And so they've decided to give up on highly trained free labor that has introduced generations of Chicago children to the greatest masterpieces of world civilization, replace them with 6 paid art educators who will be chosen not on the basis of knowledge, but on the basis of the utter irrelevancy of race. If you're a white, or if you're especially a white male and you are not trans or gay, you are finding doors closing to you across the culture.
Heather, I appreciate you coming on, and the work that you have done on police and the data and the danger relative to the way the media covers it is truly extraordinary. And so 1995 was the last time this many police officers were killed, as we just saw in 2021. Why are, in your opinion, based on the data, police under attack like they have not been in basically a quarter century in this country? What is the data telling us?
Well, the data is telling us that in the first half of 2021, ambush assaults on officers were up 91%. As you say, 2021 overall was the highest since 95. What's going on here, I believe, is the effects of ruthless, relentless demonization of the police on the part of the elite Democratic establishment, and that includes President Joe Biden. Joe Biden had the utter shamelessness in October during Police Week to memorialize slain officers in D.C., to bring up his constant theme that blacks in America were somehow under assault from police officers and that our criminal justice system was not meting out fair justice. That is a complete lie. None of the data shows it. Even left-wing criminologists, if they're forced with a gun to the head, to be honest, they will acknowledge that what drives the criminal justice system is crime, not race. But Biden, even as recently as October, has been sending that message, and criminals get the message. You also have things like the progressive prosecutors, whether it's George Gascon in Los Angeles or the recently elected Alvin Bragg in New York City, publicly announcing that they are not going to prosecute the crime of resisting arrest. I can think of nothing more corrosive to respect for the rule of law than sending out a message that our prosecutorial establishment does not regard the disrespect for officers, the refusal to go along with lawful orders as something that should be absolutely punished. When you allow, as we saw with the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis during the first outburst of the George Floyd race riots in late May of 2020, that police precinct was torched, it was burned to the ground, it was deliberately abandoned on the part of the city's leaders because they did not want to have bad videos showing them, engaged in strong combat with the Black Lives Matter rioters. When you allow the symbols and the reality of law enforcement to be so destroyed, you are destroying everybody else's safety. We do not have to accept this crime wave that is taking down the young, the elderly, the law-abiding. We do not have to accept it. It is not normal. We have to start enforcing the law again without regard to the consequences of disparate impact, which is why everybody's backing off of law enforcement, because they don't want to have a disparate impact on minorities. When you back off on law enforcement to avoid a disparate impact on minority criminals, the first people who suffer are the law-abiding minority victims.
Speaking to Heather McDonald, author of the book, the best-selling book, The War on Cops. Heather, is the pivot happening now? Because one of the big things we're discussing today on the show is not just the move away from masks and various mandates, because there's an election looming and more people are realizing how stupid and pointless a lot of this stuff was. Is that happening in a different way or on a different subject when it comes to the soft on crime policies? I mean, I mentioned the handing out of free crack pipes. That's going on. But you do have Bragg, the DA in New York, coming under a lot of heat for his just seemingly insane statement on who he will and won't prosecute. Cops are getting refunded, if you will, in places like Austin and other jurisdictions, other cities where they were defunded in the past. Is the pivot happening, or are there places that are still holding out against it?
Oh, there's many places still holding out, and here's what to look for. If we go back to enforcing the law, it will have a disparate impact because black crime rates are astronomically higher. They're about 13 times higher homicide rate for blacks than for whites. So when you enforce the law against shootings, blacks in New York City commit about 75% of all shootings, though they're 23% of the population. A black New Yorker is 50 times more likely to commit a shooting than the white New Yorker. If we go back to enforcing the law, we will have a disparate impact on criminals, and the majority of those criminals are black. If Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, backs down under the ACLU pressure, which will happen, and he's already said that he wants to collect racial data on judges to see if they are setting higher bail or holding violent offenders rather than letting them loose on the streets at a higher rate for blacks, that's going to set off alarm bells. I'm yet to be persuaded that the long-standing race narrative that says that every aspect in American society that is racially disproportionate as a result of racism has been dislodged. It is going to take people standing up and saying there are other explanations to ongoing racial disparities than racism. Yes, this is a country that had a terrible history, and that history lasted very recently. In the 60s and 70s, even in the North, blacks were still being treated with contempt, but we are a changed country. Right now, the reality is black privilege, not white privilege. There's not a single institution that is not bending over backwards to hire and promote as many blacks as possible. The criminal justice system has nothing to apologize for, and we have to combat the leftist narrative that says, here's a racial disparity. There's not 13% blacks in Google. That's because of racism and discrimination against black engineers. No, it's because of an academic skills gap, culture gap, whatever. So I'm going to hope that we've turned the corner on this, but I tell you, it's a hard haul because the academy and the Democratic establishment still remains wedded to the phony racism narrative.
Heather, quickly here, you had a stat that I was trying to reference earlier this week. The percentage chance that a police officer is shot by a black person versus the chances that they shoot a black person. It was something like 18,000 more. What is that stat? Do you remember in your book specifically? Sure. Because, yeah.
Currently, last year there were 4 unarmed blacks, allegedly. I say allegedly unarmed because that's the Washington Post database, and they classify people that are trying to grab an officer's gun as unarmed. There were 4 unarmed blacks shot by the police out of a population of between 44 and 47 million. If you look at the number of police officers who were killed last year, which is 73, and you do a per capita comparison, and you take into account the historical rate at which blacks have shot police officers fatally, which is about 42% of all cop killers are black. I'm sorry, this is a lot of numbers to throw out. The bottom line is a police officer is 400 times as likely to be killed by a black criminal as an unarmed black person is to be killed by a police officer. So the narrative, again, as we know, as you guys keep pressing home, Buck and Clay, is completely false. And the other thing that one needs to be said, that the libertarian left and the libertarians left always say, oh, it's so safe to be a police officer, nothing to worry about. These guys have it really easy. Well, again, let's look at the rate of deaths. Police officers were 1,000 times as likely to be killed last year as blacks were by police officers. So if it's safe to be a police officer and you're 1,000 times more likely to be killed than an unarmed black is, let's, for heaven's sakes, acknowledge, contrary to what Biden tells black parents all the time, that as far as the police go, it is very, very safe to be black. Should we be worried about? These insane teen thugs who are going around spraying bullets across city streets, taking down 1-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. Last year in Chicago alone, there was a 1-month-old girl shot in the head, a 4-year-old boy shot twice in the head, a 6-year-old girl shot in the head, 7-year-old girl shot in the head, 9-year-old girl shot in the head. They're not shot by the cops. They're shot by thugs, and those thugs should be off the streets and in prison, no matter their race, no matter their age.
Heather McDonald, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for the work that you have done contextualizing the danger to police out in our streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Buck and Clay. Such an honor.